Hi everyone, Jordan Runyan here with Crimson Gaming, your local Salt Lake City Innkeeper. Really excited for the Knights of the Frozen Throne expansion that's going to be released here in just a couple days. Thought we might do a kind of a quick card review, just go through the set, see which cards are worth crafting and building a deck around, and maybe some of the ones to avoid. So, just to give you a brief rundown of how this is going to work, we're going to kind of start just with the Druid cards and just kind of work our way down all the way to the neutrals. So just kind of go card by card. I'm going to try and focus mostly on constructed and standard, and focus my thoughts there. Not really focusing on arena, although I will mention a few cards that might have their place there. But for the most part, this is a standard constructed review. So without further ado, we'll kind of jump right into it. So our first card is Druid of the Swarm. It's a 2 mana, 1/2. Choose one. You can either pick to make it a 1/2 with Poisonous or 1/5 with Taunt. Now this card might look a little familiar because we already have a 1/2 with Poisonous and Taunt, and so you might be thinking, well, why would I play just a 1/2 Poisonous? Or why would I want a 1/5 taunt? Well, both of those are actually really good in different scenarios, and having versatility is actually very valuable in Hearthstone, especially in constructed play. And so this card actually is quite good, and I would give it, 3 stars. It's actually solid. It's not incredible. I mean, it's a 2-drop, and it's nothing terrifying, but it definitely has value, and we'll see play, especially in the upcoming token druid that we'll more than likely see. So the next card is Cryptlord. 3 mana, 1/5 with Taunt. After you summon a minion, gain +1 health. If I said 1/5, I meant 1/6 with Taunt. This actually is really interesting because Druid, as I mentioned, is really kind of gaining this token synergy where you kind of flood the board with weak taunts, and then you just keep playing more cards, and then you'll slowly buff them up. And this card actually has a lot of potential, and I'm also actually going to give this one 3 stars because a 1/6 is, again, not very frightening, but it's kind of hard to do 6 damage on turn 3. And then even if you just play 1 or 2 weaker minions again on turn 4, this already has 8 health, and along with some of the other cards we're going to talk about later, this has some pretty good synergy and really does a great job of kind of just stalling out the board. Nash. 3 mana, give your hero 3 attack this turn and gain 3 armor. Very similar to Claw or Bite, each of which cost 1 or 4 mana. It's a net gain essentially of 6 if you're going face. On turn 3, most 3 drops have 3, maybe 4 health, so this trades fairly well there. Might see some play. I'm only giving this 2 stars simply because it's not that great on turn 3. You'd rather drop a minion than do 3 damage. I mean, you have Wrath if you're trying to clear something, and gaining 3 armor, you'd much rather just play, for the 3 mana choose one, the 4 attack or gain 8 armor. You'd much rather play that. So this really doesn't have a place unless you're trying to go for some weird, spell druid, which I don't see. Probably should give this 1 star, but I'll give Blizzard some credit here maybe. Next card is Strong Shell Scavenger. 4 mana, 2/3, Battlecry. Give your taunt minions +2/+2. So we're already seeing this taunt synergy in Druid, more so than even Taunt Warrior. I think Taunt Warrior is kind of falling a little bit out of at least buffing your taunt minions. There's definitely still the quest, but like buffing your actual taunt minions, we're going to see a lot of that in Druid. This card by itself, very, very poor stats. But if you have at least 2 taunt minions on the board, which you likely will because of all the taunt tokens and taunt minions, this actually goes, is a decent follow-up on turn 4 after playing Crypt Lord, right? And so you turn your 1/6 into a 3/9, which is actually really strong. So this card actually gets 3 stars as well because it has it's just right and it falls in line with the taunt synergy there for Druid. Whether Taunt Druid really is very successful is a completely other story, but the way the cards kind of line up, this card is actually not bad. Fate Spinner, choose a Death Rattle secretly. So it's a 5 mana card, 5/3, deal 3 damage to all minions or give them +2/+2. So you choose one secretly, and then it happens when this card dies. So your opponent doesn't know, but it helps them too. So this card actually is terrible. It's a 5/3 with Death Rattle, do something, but that do something really, I mean, Drew doesn't have a really great way to deal 3 damage, so this is a way of doing that. But other than that, like, you don't want to use the +2/+2 almost ever, because that's buffing your opponent's minions too. So I'm giving this 2 stars simply because of the deal 3 damage to all minions. If you're finding that you need to do that much, just blanket board clear, maybe this card will see a little bit of play, but I really don't think so. Spreading Plague. Summon a 1/5 Scarab with Taunt. If your opponent has more minions, cast this again. This is actually really cool, and it's not the only card like this in the set that continues to cast it pending a condition. And this, it's not Unleash the Scarabs. It only fills up the board up to the amount of minions that your opponent has. So if you have 3 and they have 4, this will only summon 1 Scarab. So don't make that mistake, like they did on stream with Ben Brode and Brian Kibler. But actually a pretty strong card, especially if your opponent is playing really aggro and you're trying to stall out and slow things down. You play this, their momentum has completely shut down, especially if you have nothing on the board or only say 1 or 2 minions. So this card actually is very strong, and we'll definitely see some play in the Taunt Druid variant. Webweave. 5 mana, summon 2 1/2 poisonous spiders. Now, this card seems overcosted to me, and I'm actually gonna give it 1 star simply because 5 mana for 2 1/2, even if they're poisonous, yeah, they're beasts because they're spiders, is not worth it. I would much rather just play something else on 5. There's actually a 2 mana or a 5 mana 2/5 with poisonous. That's much more likely to survive than playing this. And this card is just bad. Now we're gonna see the first Death Knight hero card. This is the one for Druid Malfurion the Pestilent. Choose one, summon 2 poisonous spiders or 2 scarabs with taunt. So those, of course, are 1/2 spiders or 1/5 scarabs. This card does work with gosh, I can't think of the card. But with the 4 mana 3/5 that gives you both. This does work, and in fact, when we look at the hero power, Plague Lord, hero power, choose Fandral. Sorry, that's it. It does work with Fandral. Plague Lord, hero power, choose 1, gain 3 attack this turn or 3 armor. And this also does work with Fandral. It was confirmed. So some nice synergy there. Kind of a cool effect. And as you'll see, you also gain the 5 armor. So we'll give I'm giving this one 4 stars simply because it is strong, it is powerful. It does only cost 7. It's a little slow, but it does summon 2 minions, gives you 5 armor, and a really nice hero power. So this is actually a nice kind of tempo play on turn 7 if you're able to play it then. or even later, because you're able to kind of stall out and put 10 health worth of minions on the board, or 2 poisonous spiders if you're trying to, you know, keep the board clear. So 4 stars on this guy. Hadronox. So this is one card I was mentioning earlier that kind of has some synergy now with the Taunt Druid. 9 mana, 3/7, Death Rattle. Summon your taunt minions that died this game. Now, there's only a couple problems with this. It's 9 mana, and it's not a battle cry. It's not like N'Zoth where it just happens immediately. It has to die, and 7 health. You know, you can't just knock that into something and it'll die instantly. It takes a little bit of effort to actually get this to die, and so you either would have to give this taunt, which most cards for Druid that give cards taunt aren't all that great unless you're running, say, you know, Defender of Argus or something like that. Might see some synergy there, might not, but either way, this card has a couple issues, but is very powerful if you can pull it off. I'm only giving it 2 stars simply because it is kind of slow and clunky, and isn't really that much of a threat, and has so much health that it's hard for you to force the issue. So unfortunately, just kind of a weaker card. So on the other hand, we have Ultimate Infestation. 10 mana, break the game. So it deals 5 damage, draws 5 cards, gains 5 armor, and summons a 5/5 ghoul. So this is essentially like 16 or 17 mana worth of stuff wrapped into one card. Now, this card is actually insane, because if you're stalling out, you know, the game with taunts and all kinds of tokens and just denying your opponent from doing anything to you, and then you play this, it's huge. Not only are you basically playing Firelance Portal, but you're gaining 5 health and you're drawing 5 cards. Drawing 5 cards is insane. That no other card draws that many without, you know, in ridiculous conditions like Divine Favor or something. So this is actually really, really powerful. And I'm actually giving this one 5 stars. It's not the most powerful card in the set, but it is very, very powerful. So very likely going to see this with maybe a Mohadib, with the Atiesh, summoning a 10-drop on top of this. Very, very powerful. Alright, so we move into the Hunter cards. Play dead. 1 mana, trigger a friendly minion's Death Rattle. So we've seen at least 3 other cards up to this point, all of which are Hunter, trying to trigger your Death Rattle effects. And this time, it only costs 1, so maybe we'll actually see some play. And I'm not actually joking about that. I'm actually giving this one 3 stars because it actually might, you know, be playable now that it only costs 1. Previously, we had cards like Feign Death that cost 2, or the Princess Huhuron cost 6. Although it summoned a legendary minion, but still very, very slow, very clunky. Even the 3 mana 3/3 that triggered a Death Rattle just didn't see any play because it was just too clunky. But this might actually see some play because it's only 1 mana, so it's literally play your Death Rattle card and then spend 1 more mana and get that Death Rattle effect twice, which is really good. So actually may see some play. Toxic Arrow. 2 mana, deal 2 to a minion. If it survives, give it poisonous. And I really don't want to spend too much time on this card because it's just terrible. If you're going to deal 2 damage to a minion, why not just play Arcane Shot? If you want to give something poisonous, why not just play a 2 mana poisonous? This card is just terrible. So 1 star. Venom Strike Trap. Kind of interesting. It's the new secret for Hunter. When one of your minions is attacked, summon a 2/3 poisonous cobra. Not bad. It's basically, you know, spend 2 mana, get a free 3-drop. This card isn't all that great, but it is kind of good in the sense that, you know, your opponent is trying to play around all these secrets, and now not only are they anticipating potentially Snake Trap, but now Venom Strike Trap when they attack one of your minions. So on top of the new Hunter legendary, which we'll get to in a sec. This actually might be kind of useful. Maybe not actually be included in a Hunter deck unless they're going all out secrets. But kind of an interesting card. I'm giving this one 2 stars simply because it's kind of niche. Might see a little bit of play, but you know, only in those rare instances. Bear Shark, 3 mana, 4/3, can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. So Fairy Dragon, but it's a beast, and it costs 1 more and then gains 2 more stats. Actually pretty strong. This card is actually very, very solid. I'm giving this one 3 stars because it's definitely playable, has good synergy with Hunter, and you aren't really trying to target it with a hero power or a spell usually. Usually you would just play like Houndmaster on turn 4 on top of this, and a 6/5 that can't be targeted by spells is actually really, really powerful. Can't be cleared by Fireball or anything like that. Their opponent has to, you know, deal with this through other means. So actually a very, very strong card. Not crazy by any means. Definitely not like 4 or 5 stars worthy, but good card. Stitch Tracker. 3 mana, 2/2. Discover a copy of a minion in your deck. So this is actually kind of cool. It's kind of like Shadow Reflections for Priest, but instead of a spell, you're getting a minion. On top of that, you're also getting a 2/2. Kind of interesting. It's a little weak for Hunter. Maybe this is definitely more of a mid-range card. We'll see play in mid-range Hunter if that ends up actually being a thing. Hunter's really weak right now. Unfortunately, does not see a whole lot of play. But if the new cards do manage to flesh that out, this card is actually is decent. I'm giving this one 3 stars because it's a 3 mana 2/2 draw card that you need, and it's a minion. It's not just a beast, it's a minion. So you have a little more flexibility on what you can pull. And right around 3-4 mana is when you need to really secure that curve, especially for mid-range, is very important. So this card is actually strong in that archetype. 4 mana, 2/1, Exploding Bloatbat. Death Rattle, deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. Now this is interesting. It's very weak 4-drop, especially for Hunter. However, it gives them more board clear, which is something Hunter desperately has always needed. Up until now, the only real consistent board clear, and I say consistent in quotes, is Explosive Trap, and that relies on your opponent hitting your face, and usually it's kind of telegraphed and you can tell when that happens, whereas with this it's a little bit easier to pull off, especially if you're playing play dead. So it's 5 mana, deal 2 enemy minions, and you get a 2/1. Not great. I'm giving this one 2 stars simply because it could see a little bit of play. It's definitely not a strong card by any means, but might see some play in mid-range / control Hunter if that ends up being a thing. Now, Professor Putricide, Hunter's legendary here. So 4 mana, 5/4. Okay stats. But after you play a secret, put a random Hunter secret into the battlefield. Now this is kind of insane because if you're playing Secret Hunter, you have your 3-drop, your 3/4 that makes all your secrets free. So you play that, and if it lives, it's pretty. I mean, 3/4 surviving 1 turn isn't unreasonable. And then you play this, and then you drop at least 1 or 2 secrets. That's some pretty insane value. Unfortunately, it kind of requires all that setup in your hand. However, it does have some power, and the fact that it's a random Hunter secret makes it much harder for your opponent to play around because there's quite a few secrets, and most of them don't end up being played. Things like Misdirection or Cat Trick that could end up being randomized onto the field, or the new Venom Strike trap. So this card actually is kind of interesting, and I think we might see some fun Hunter trap secret decks. Not saying they'll be particularly powerful, but this card is kind of kind of fun and has some good value. Corpse Widow, 5 mana, 4/6. Your Death Rattle cards cost 2 less. This card is actually really strong. In a Death Rattle Hunter deck, making your cards cost 2 less, where a lot of your Death Rattle cards cost 2 or 3, is really strong. And turns out that, you know, a 4/6 Beast on turn 5 is also not a bad card. So this card actually gets 4 stars because it's very strong and has great synergy with like that mid-range Death Rattle Hunter. And then here we see the Hunter Death Knight card, Deathstalker Rexar. 6 mana, Battlecry, deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. So a little bit more board clear love for the Hunters, as well as gain 5 armor. And then the hero power is Build a Beast, which, if you haven't seen this yet, basically what it does is you discover a beast, you pick one of 3 beasts, and then you discover another one, and then you literally combine their 2 health and attack and their mana cost, and you get any text on them, and then you just get this zombie of a beast. So you could get like a 5 mana 4/8 with taunt, death rattles, you know, deal 1 damage or something crazy, you know, just all these different things. And so this actually is kind of fun. The problem is it's not going face anymore. It's putting an overstated beast into your hand, which means if you're doing that, you have to be controlling the board by other means and hopefully pushing damage to your opponent's face that way. So unfortunately, I'm only giving this 2 stars because of the board clear, or at least appearance of board clear. But the hero power is just kind of slow, unfortunately, because you still have to cast this minion, right? It is strong if you can manage to maintain control of the board, but it is kind of slower than what Hunter is traditionally, you know, designed for. And so, unfortunately, I don't think this will see a whole lot of competitive play, but it is a fun concept. And then we have Abominable Bowman, 7 mana, 6/7 Death Rattle, summon a random friendly beast that died this game. Unfortunately, this card is just way too expensive. I would honestly prefer if this was, you know, half the stats and half the cost, and might actually see some play. But the fact that you have to play this for 7 mana just is kind of unfortunate. You could try and trigger this with a, you know, play dead, 8 mana, summon a 6/7 and a random beast that died, but usually you're going to have like weaker beasts that have died, and this might not end up well for you. So I'm only giving this 2 stars. It gets the second because it has a death rattle effect and might see a little bit of play, but it is very weak. Alright, so moving on to the mage spells, or mage cards. Breath of Sindragosa, 1 mana, deal 2 damage to a random enemy minion and freeze it. This card is just kind of unfortunate because if it was deal 2 damage to a minion and freeze it, that would be strong. But since it's random, the only time this really is going to see a whole lot of use is on like turn 1 or turn 2 when there's only 1 minion on the board that potentially has 2 health. Otherwise, you're better off just playing other cards like a Frostbolt, where you can actually target the minion you want to hit. And so, unfortunately, this card just won't see any play. If it were a Shaman card, which we'll get into later, this might actually be a little bit useful, but unfortunately, it's just not going to see play. Ice Walker, 2 mana, 1/3. Your hero power also freezes the target. This is kind of interesting, especially with some of the changes to the hero power that we'll get to in a minute. Actually kind of strong. It is an elemental, which is kind of cool, and now gives your hero power, you know, the ability to just stall out a minion each turn, which actually is very powerful. And this is really good for kind of a slower mage deck. Excuse me. The only downside is it's only a 1/3, so it dies to most things. So you're likely only going to get maybe one turn out of this, and so it's basically just saying 4 mana, summon a 1/3, do 1 damage, and freeze it. You might as well just be playing Cone of Cold, which doesn't see play. So unfortunately, this card actually just gets 1 star. Cold Ray, 3 mana, 3/4. Battle Cry, if an enemy is frozen, draw a card. Now, I know I was ragging on all the frozen effects, but we actually are going to see other means of freezing your opponents that aren't terrible. So this card actually could potentially see some play because it's a 3/4, which is okay. And then drawing a card, for 3 mana and something a 3/4 is not bad. However, I'm only going to give this 2 stars because while the stats are okay, in order for it to really see play, it would have to be like a 4/4 in constructed at least, and then potentially draw a card. Because drawing a card is kind of worth like 1 mana roughly. It's kind of like 0.75 mana, just drawing a card outright. But this card it's not quite good enough, but it could maybe see some play, but there's just other cards you might rather play. So Doomed Apprentice, 3 mana, 3/2. Your opponent's spells cost 1 more. So this is kind of interesting. It's kind of like Lotheb, if you remember that card from back in Naxxramas, except it persists. It's not just a battle cry, but it's only 1 more. Kind of like Sorcerer's Apprentice, except it's inverted, right? And costs 1 more mana. Unfortunately, this card will only see play through like tech decisions in response to maybe how the meta is performing. So there's not really any way of knowing exactly how well this card will do. But at face value, I mean, I give this card 2 stars simply because it's not awful, and there are certain situations in which you would want to play this card, but it's not one you'll just be like, oh yeah, Doomed Apprentice. I'm definitely putting that in all of my mage decks. So, unfortunately, 2 stars. New Mage Secret. Frozen Clone, 3 mana, secret. After your opponent plays a minion, add 2 copies of it to your hand. So, kind of like Duplicate, kind of like Mirror Entity, except it shows up in your hand. And while you likely won't see this played in many mage decks itself, there are potentially some instances in which this could be useful, especially if you were to discover this secret, or through other means like Primordial Glyph or Kabbalist Tome. However, I'm going to give it 2 stars because of one of the new cards that was revealed or released that pulls all your secrets out. That could be kind of fun, but we'll get to that in a minute. So next card, Smolacrum, something like that. 3 mana, copy the lowest cost minion in your hand. So this is kind of a weird card because, and I'm not entirely sure how this card works. Copy the lowest cost minion in your hand. Does that mean you just gain a copy in your hand, or it plays the minion that's the lowest cost in your hand? I'm inclined to believe that it just puts it in your hand instead of plays the copy, because that would be kind of broken. Either way, this card is ridiculous and will likely not see play unless there's some weird card, and I could be completely wrong on this card, but it just feels too weird and not very productive. It's like going backwards. So 1 star. Ghastly Conjurer, 4 mana, 2/6. Battlecry, add a mirror image spell to your hand. So 2/6 is actually not bad stats for a 4-drop, and then adding a mirror image spell to your hand is actually pretty decent. I mean, it's a 2 mana or 4 mana, 2/6 plus 4 more health, right, with taunt. Only reason Mirror Image doesn't see play is because, I mean, there's better cards to put in your deck, but if you were to put this in your deck and you can also get the Mirror Image in there, it's actually not bad. So this card actually gets 3 stars because if mages are looking to maintain reliable board control and, you know, prevent as much damage to their face as they can, this card actually might see a good amount of play in decks like, you know, Quest Mage, or maybe not Freeze Mage, but, you know, Control Mage and things like that. So this card is actually not bad. Okay, so this is the spell I was talking about. Glacial Mysteries, 8 mana, put 1 of each secret from your deck into the battlefield. Now, there are, I believe, 7 now secrets that Mage can play in Standard, and that's a total of 21 mana that you'd be playing for 8 mana here, potentially, right? That doesn't mean all of those secrets are good or will end up doing good things for you, but that's a lot of things to, you know, get played down on the board. Now, people will compare this to, you know, Mysterious Challenger, the Paladin card that played, you know, 1 of each secret from their deck. And they're like, well, why does this cost so much more? Well, Mage secrets cost 2 more per secret. However, this doesn't summon a 6/6 on top of it. So this card, while it's kind of interesting, only gets 2 stars. Yes, it's kind of powerful. Will it see a lot of play? Probably not. However, it'll likely end up, you know, being a little useful if you pull it out of, say, Primordial Glyph or Kabbalist Tome, and you need, you know, 1 or 2 secrets in your deck, and you just can't pull those out. But you also just have, you know, Arcanologist that can just pull the secret out for you, and you can play it outright, and that costs 5 mana instead of 8 or even 6 because of Primordial Glyph. But, you know, the fact that it exists is something to be, you know, mentioned. Okay, so the legendary for Mage, Syndragosa, 8 mana, 8/8, Battlecry, summon 2/0/1 Frozen Champions. Now, we won't talk about the dragon, but we will talk about the Frozen Champions. So, they have 1 health, and when they die, add a random legendary minion to your hand. Now, is this card good? Yes, this card is good, but it's not quite good enough, except for a couple situations. So, the problem with this is you're playing an 8 mana 8/8, which is fine. But the problem is the legendaries that you get, you have to play them on top of that. And you could just get garbage legendaries. Like, there are plenty of legendaries out there that are worthless. So this could go well, this could go very poorly. The reason it's actually okay, and I'm going to give it 3 stars, is because not of the card itself, but because of the hero power that you get from the new Death Knight. And that should be our next card here. Frostlich Jaina. This card is insane, and I'm going to say that it is one of the strongest cards in the set. So 9 mana, Battlecry, summon a 3/6 water elemental, and your elementals have lifesteal this game. That right there is already quite a bit. You get a 4 mana card for free, you gain 5 armor for free, and your elementals have lifesteal this game. For the rest of the game, it's just a passive, it's just always there. That's insane. Then you get this hero power, Icy Touch. Deal 1 damage. If this kills a minion, summon a water elemental. What has 1 health that you could just ping away? Oh yeah, Frozen Champion. Amongst other things, right? So this is actually really, really, really powerful. And we will likely see this in every Control Mage, every Freeze Mage. We'll likely see some, you know, mid-range Elemental Mage decks come out of this simply because this is just so powerful. We'll actually probably see some Frost Elementals show up just because of this. So this card is nuts, and if not the most powerful, one of the most powerful cards in the set. Oh, how did that guy sneak in there? Whoops. We'll come back to him. Actually, why not? He's such a meme card. We'll just talk about him now. So Archbishop Benedictus is the priest legendary. Um, 7 mana, 4/6. Battlecry, shuffle a copy of your opponent's deck into your deck. And looks like he got shuffled into our cards here. Whether that was planned or not will remain to be seen. This card's kind of weird and memey, but it's not very consistent, because putting your opponent's deck into your deck means you can't draw the cards you want. It's not like Thoughtsteal where you just draw them and you don't have to worry about that interfering with your draws. It literally just takes them and puts them in your deck. And that's not usually a good thing, because you want to draw your cards that take advantage of their deck, not draw their cards, not the ones you put in your deck on purpose. So this card, while it's fun and interesting, I give it 2 stars instead of 1, simply because you play this card, you win the fatigue game, unless you're playing another priest. Simply just because you're going to have way more cards, and if you can continuously control them out and stall the game, you'll just win. But other than that, this card makes your deck less consistent, which is not a good thing. Alright, so now to go to the Paladin cards. Righteous Protector, 1 mana, 1/1, Divine Shield with Taunt. Icemill Power Creep, and this card is actually insanely obnoxious, especially with some of the new Paladin cards that are coming out. And this card gets 4 stars because this is kind of insane when you start looking at all the other cards that it can combo with, and just the fact it's a 1/1 with Divine Shield and Taunt. That's an Annoyotron essentially with just 1 less health. And granted, it's not a mech, but who cares? This is really, really strong, really, really powerful, especially with some of the other cards. Dark Conviction, 2 mana, set a minion's attack and health to 3. So basically, you have what is it? The Maiden of Ulduar, or whatever her name is. The 3/4 that does the same thing, but it's a spell. This card actually is not terrible. I'm giving it 2 stars simply because it's not insane, but it actually has some good synergy and is potentially powerful to kind of weaken some of your opponent's minions. But there are other cards that kind of do the same thing, but it's not awful. Might see some play, but doesn't really stand out to me. Desperate Stand, 2 mana, give a minion Death Rattle, return this to life with 1 health. So kind of like Ancestral Spirit for Shaman. Costs a little less though. And it's a Paladin card. And these effects are usually really strong with Divine Shield. And what class has more Divine Shields than anyone else? Paladin. So this is also very, very strong. So with all of these Death Rattle effects, we might be seeing some more silences being teched in. But this card is actually is pretty strong, and we'll likely see some play in some of the slower Death Rattle, maybe mid-range control Paladins, just because this gets you some pretty good value for 2 mana. Now, Howling Commander, 3 mana, 2/2, draw Divine Shield minion from your deck. This is pretty good because what does this do? This draws Tyrion. This draws Wicker Flame Burn Bristle. This draws all kinds of cards that you want to draw specifically because they have Divine Shield, and so you can target those cards specifically with this. So not only do you now have one 3 mana card, the 1/4 taunt that potentially gives you a billion Tyrions, but you now have this that will just draw it out of your deck for you, which is very strong. This card gets 3 stars because this will likely see a good amount of play just because it's so specific, and you can build your deck in such a way that this essentially pulls out whatever card it is you're looking for. Tyrion. So now, Arrogant Crusader, 4 mana, 5/2. If it's your opponent's turn, summon a 2/2 ghoul. Well, that's basically a 4 mana, 5/4, right? Um, I would say it's a 7/4, but I mean, it's likely not going to do all of that 5 damage to something on turn 4. It might, but if your opponent is choosing to trade into it, then it kind of bear with me. The math checks out where it's usually only doing on average, you know, 2.5, 3 damage each time, and so the 5 is a little overkill usually if your opponent is the one choosing to make the trade. So, is this card good? Not exactly. I mean, if your opponent chooses to kill it, you just get a 2/2 and they wasted a trade, which is essentially Infested Tarn, which is okay. Otherwise, you get a 5 damage in if they don't kill it, but chances are they'll probably kill it. And like I said, it's essentially Infested Tarn at that point. Chillblade Champion, 4 mana, 3/2 with charge and lifesteal. Kind of interesting. So it's basically 4 mana, deal 3 damage, heal 3, and then make your opponent get rid of it. This card's okay. It's actually a little too weak, unfortunately, but it's kind of an interesting card. We might actually see this card be played more in, say, like a hand buff variant of Paladin, if that ever comes to light, because then this card does become quite powerful. I mean, a 4/3 with charge and lifesteal for 4 is significantly better. You're basically looking at a true silver champion at that point. So this card might see some play, but right off hand in the current state of the game, it's just not quite good enough. Light Sorrow, 4 mana, 1/4. After a friendly minion loses Divine Shield, gain 1 attack. Now, this card is kind of interesting, especially if we do see the rise of the Divine Shield Paladin, where it's pretty easy to just get rid of Divine Shield on a lot of minions. The problem is you have to have this out on the board. Now, it does have 4 durability, so the chance of, that happening over the course of those few turns is pretty good. The problem is this card, you have to draw it, and why not just play True Silver or something else? However, I am going to give this card 3 stars simply because it has the potential to be very strong. I mean, even if just 2 minions lose Divine Shield, this is a 4 mana 3/4 weapon. It's Assassin's Blade, but it costs 1 less, and it can potentially keep getting buffed later just because your minions are losing Divine Shield, because this happens whether it's in your hand or while it's on the field. So it's actually potentially very strong. Oh, poor Bolvar. 5 mana, 1/7 Divine Shield. Basically the same thing as our Light Sorrow here, except it gains 2 attack. Problem is, this is a minion, it's not a weapon, and so it can't just sit there in your hand or on the field without being destroyed. And it costs 5, and unfortunately this just isn't going to work very likely. I'm going to give it 2 stars because it could potentially work out somehow, but it's kind of just in the same boat as the old Bolvar. Didn't see play then, probably won't see play now. Now, Blackguard, 6 mana, 3/9. Whenever your hero is healed, deal that much damage to a random enemy minion. This is a really good card because 9 health, turns out, is really quite a lot. And it's hard to do 9 damage unless you're a mage, to one target. And so this card is actually very sticky and will likely stick around for at least a turn or two to get some value out of this. And so you can play Blackguard and then maybe a True Silver or a number of other cards that will get some good value out of this. Plus, it trades pretty well into some things. So this card actually gets 4 stars. Very well statted, has a nice effect, and it doesn't cost too much. Uther of the Evan Blade. So 9 mana, equip a 5/3 lifesteal weapon. And then, of course, gain the 5 armor. So that alone is 20 net health, which is quite a lot. And then you gain this new hero power. So we'll talk about the first half. So instead of summoning a 1/1, you now summon a 2/2. However, if you manage to summon 4 of those 2/2s and keep them all on the board, you win. You just win the game. It's Exodia, if you know what that is from, Yu-Gi-Oh. This is kind of crazy. Will people be able to pull this off? Yes. Consistently? No. However, the other half of the card is very strong. And then you're also basically just getting 2/2s instead of 1/1s each turn. So think of it like Justicar. Instead of summoning 2 1/1s, you just summon a 2/2, which is not bad for 2 mana. I'm giving this card 4 stars because this half of the card is insane. You get a 5/3 lifesteal weapon, which is quite a bit. I mean, everyone gets 5 armor, but a 5/3 lifesteal weapon is pretty great. And then the 2/2. And then there's very low chance that you just win the game. Probably not going to happen very often, but kind of fun. Alright, moving on to Priest. So, Shadow Ascendant. 2 mana, at the end of your turn, give another random friendly minion +1/+1. Interesting. Priest does need 2 drops. However, in order for this to be good, you have to have played a 1-drop. And turns out if you played a 1-drop as Priest, you're okay. You don't necessarily need that 2 mana, instant follow-up. So, will this card see play? Probably not. Giving it 2 stars simply because it's okay, but it's not great. All right, Spirit Lash, 2 mana, lifesteal, deal 1 damage to all minions. And so if I haven't talked about this before, lifesteal means whenever you deal damage, you gain that much health back to your hero. So essentially, we're looking at Whirlwind for 1 more mana, but you heal for each of those minions that you damage, which is very strong, especially with some of the cards that Priest has coming up. So this card gets 3 stars. This is very, very powerful. Yeah, it damages your own minions, but Priest usually likes to have at least a couple minions that are damaged so he can heal them right back. So this card, very good, especially in the early game where you're trying to deal with those low health minions and boost your life total back up. Acolyte of Agony, 3 mana, 3/3 lifesteal. So this is just kind of a vanilla. This is what to compare. Lifesteal minions too. 1 mana, 1/1 with lifesteal is kind of the status quo. Will this see play? Probably not. 2 stars simply because it's okay, but this is not a card you would likely put in your deck. Eternal Servitude, 4 mana, discover a friendly minion that died this game and summon it. This is a good card. This is essentially Resurrect, but pay 2 more mana and you have a much higher chance of that card actually being good or something you want to come back. So this card is very powerful. 4 stars, because even if you play this in the late game, you're not just going to potentially get some 1/1 or some 1/3 that died early on. Likely you're going to be able to pick one of those 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 mana cost cards that died and just get it right back. So this card is very powerful. Alright, Devour Mind, 5 mana, copy 3 cards in your opponent's deck and add them to your hand. So this is essentially Thought Steal for 2 more mana and you get 1 more card. Will this card see play? Probably not, except in the decks that are just kind of for fun to steal your opponent's cards and abuse them with them. Gets 2 stars because it's it's on par with what already exists, but it's not better or more likely to see play than say Thought Steal, and it costs 2 more mana, so it's a little slower. Alright, Embrace Darkness, 6 mana. Choose an enemy minion at the start of your turn, gain control of it. Now, it's basically mind control for 4 less mana, but your opponent has a turn to kind of react to it. Is this good? Yes. Is it good enough? No, because Mind Control doesn't see play, and on turn 6, your opponent likely has a way to deal with this. However, if they don't, it 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 works out for you, but you might as well be playing, MC Tech at this point, because if your opponent doesn't have an answer for this, their deck is probably not very good, and you're probably not at a very good point in Constructed or in Standard, so spending 6 mana to try and steal your opponent's minion without giving them and still giving them a chance to react to it, probably not going to see play. However, Shadow Essence, 6 mana, summon a 5/5 copy of a random minion in your deck. I could see some decks building around this card, kind of like with Barnes. Instead of a 1/1, it's a 5/5. Will it see play though? Probably not, just because it's random. If you were to discover a minion in your deck, maybe it might be worth it. But that would be a little too good. But since it's random, you would have to really build a deck around this, and I don't see very many decks that would be worth playing that would have that in mind. However, we have the Death Knight Priest card, Shadow Reaper Anduin. Battlecry, destroy all minions with 5 or more attack. That's pretty good. I mean, it's Shadow Word Death the whole board. Pretty good, especially because Priest oftentimes has minions that have 3 or 4 attack. Usually not much higher than that. Let's get rid of that. But then the hero power is basically Shadow Form. However, whenever you play a card, you refresh your hero power. So Beardo, but instead of it just being a spell, it's any card. So this actually is very powerful, and we could see some potential combos, OTKs with this, especially if you pull out like a Velen or something like that. I'm giving this card 3 stars because it is strong with the hero, with the battle cry. Unfortunately, you lose the value of your heal, and Shadow Form itself is not all that great, but you do get the refresh whenever you play a card. Plus, with the Raza effect of making your hero power cost 0, this is strong. Unfortunately, it's just, it's a little awkward, but it could be very powerful if you pull this combo off. Obsidian Statue, 9 mana, 4/8, Taunt, Lifesteal, Death Rattle, destroy a random enemy minion. That's kind of interesting, actually. Has good stats, has Lifesteal, and Taunt. So this is basically Primordial Drake without dealing the 2 damage, but it'll destroy a random enemy minion when it dies. It's not bad. Unfortunately, it costs 9 mana, which is pretty steep. Most 9 mana cards, if they're good, they have to be insane. Like, compare this to Ysera, which doesn't really even see play anymore, and is probably one of the better 9-drops. Like, has equivalent health because of the lifesteal. The 4 goes back to you instead of on the minion, and then just destroys a random enemy minion. But you might as well just have a spell that can target, like Dream or Ysera Awakens or something like that. So this card, fortunately not very good, but might see a little bit of play maybe in like a Death Rattle Priest or something. Would definitely be a good target for our friend over here, the Eternal Servitude. You bring this back, you're in good shape. You just paid 4 mana for 4/8 with Taunt, Death Rattle, kill an enemy minion. That's pretty good, but who knows? Only going to give it 2 stars though. Alright, moving on to Rogue. We have the Doomerang. Throw your weapon at a minion. It deals its damage and returns to your hand. Kind of cool. Looks like they're trying to make weapon Rogue work. Will it work? Probably not. I'm not going to lie. But I'll give it 2 stars because it has a really cool effect. And has some good value, but I don't know if it's going to be enough. Alright, so we have Leeching Poison here. 2 mana, give your weapon lifesteal. Again, not quite good enough. I'm actually giving this one 1 star because in a meta where weapons are prevalent, it'll just get oozed. Roll the bones, draw a card. If it has Death Rattle, cast this again. This actually isn't too bad. I mean, draw a card for 1 is bad, but if you have a lot of Death Rattle cards in your deck, which Rogue might end up having, then, 2 mana, draw 2 cards. Not bad. If you draw another Death Rattle card, draw 3 cards. So this actually has some potential. I'm going to give this 3 stars simply because Rogue has quite a few Death Rattles that it can get some value out of, and so, things like Sherazim, things like Huckster, etc. So it is actually very likely to get more value out of this card than you would not, and so this card actually has some good potential. Plague Scientist, 3 mana, 2/3, give a friendly minion poisonous, but it's combo, which means you have to have played a card earlier. If this were Battlecry, this would actually be potentially playable. Since it's not, again, 2 stars. It's not the worst, and I know I've been giving a lot of cards 2 stars. 2 stars basically means there's a non-zero chance that it'll see play, but more than likely it's just not a good card. Shadowblade, 3 mana, 3/2. Your hero is immune this turn. Now, I would like this card a lot more if it didn't have the battle cry. If it was just your hero is immune this turn. Because that would be great, because that would mean whenever you have this weapon up, you're immune. But that would essentially be Gladiator's Longbow. However, there are some interesting synergies with this card. I'm going to give it, again, 2 stars simply because... Actually, no, we're going to give it 3 because it does have a good effect. It saves you a little bit of damage, and there are those cards that allow you to bounce this back and forth if you are going that route. But, again, in a meta where weapons are prevalent, it'll just get oozed. Lillian Voss, 4 mana, 4/5, Battlecry, replace spells in your hand with random spells from your opponent's class. It's kind of interesting, especially because Rogue a lot of times will end up with a lot of kind of useless spells in their hand. Not usually on turn 4 though. Usually you'll have at least an Eviscerate or 2 that you're holding on to, maybe a Prep because you're wanting to Auctioneer later. And so filling your hand with random spells from your opponent's class that could potentially cost 10 mana is not ideal. So this card sadly gets 2 stars because unless you're going for the Burgle Rogue, this card is not going to see any kind of play. Runeforge Haunter, 4 mana, 5/3. During your turn, your weapon doesn't lose durability. So it's basically 4 mana, 5/3. Give your weapon 1 durability, because the chance of this card living more than 1 turn after turn 4 is pretty low. However, being able to stall that out for like the Doomerang might be good. We'll give it 3 just because it does have a kind of good effect. The stats aren't terrible. 3 health is kind of weak though for 4, but if you are able to, pull off that weapon synergy, the problem is just Rogue. I'm dropping it to 2 because just Rogue weapons are just, it's not in a good spot. And I know they're trying to push it, and it's just not, I don't see it happening. Bone Baron, 5 mana, 5/5, add 2 1/1 skeletons to your hand. Now, why on earth would you just want to play 2 1/1 skeletons? What? Wouldn't you rather just have spells? But, I don't know, this card is kind of filler, not very good. I'm just going to give it 1 star, just because it's not going to see play. I mean, adding 2 1/1 skeletons to your hand is not synergistic with anything else Rogue is going to want to do anyways. However, this card is kind of fun. Spectral Pillager, 6 mana, 5/5, combo, deal damage equal to the number of cards you've played this turn. There can be some pretty nutty combos with this, whether it's Shadowcaster, whether you're playing a bunch of coins, whether you're bouncing this card back with Shadow Step. This actually could be really kind of crazy. The problem is you have to have a lot of cards to dump on this. You'd have to have maybe an Auctioneer on the board. really kind of a fun concept though. And I'm giving it 3 stars because it does have the potential there, and it's well statted enough that you could actually get some good value off of this. The problem is you'd usually probably want to be going face with this damage, otherwise why not just play Vile Spine? So, I don't know. You'd have to get some insane damage out of this to really make this card worth it. Now this card is really cool though. Valeera the Hollow. Battlecry gains stealth until your next turn. That's really, really good because it's not quite Ice Block, but you can't be targeted by spells, attacks, or anything. You could still be hit by, you know, random targeted things, like Mare Noggenfog or crap like that. But this is actually really good. And if you're trying to stall out a turn or wait out one more card, this is really, really cool. Really good effect. On top of that, you get this passive hero power now. During your turn, add a shadow reflection to your hand. And what that means is you get this card. Each time you play a card, transform this into a copy of it. So the most recent card you played, this is what, you know, that's what this card will be. You can only have one of these in your hand at a time. And so if, you know, during your turn you had one, you know, you can only have one at a time. So this actually is very powerful, and you know, will allow you to combo some cards, especially if they're cheaper cards. So say like an Edwin or something. You know, you do some nutty Edwin turn, or you know, there's all kinds of cards that you could combo with this. So I'm giving this card 4 stars simply because A, you basically are giving Rogue Ice Block for a turn, and B, this card is really, really good. You get, you know, basically a free copy of this card, of whatever it is you're wanting to play. So really, really fun effect, really powerful. Excited to see how it kind of turns out. All right, let's go over to Shaman. I'm going to try and pick up the pace here a little bit. So Shaman, Burlock, Murloc, 2/2, freeze an enemy. Actually kind of cool, especially because of the effects that are coming up. I'm going to give this card 3 stars, simply because of how Shaman and Freeze are working this set, and so you'll see a little bit more of that in a little bit. Ice Fishing, however, 2 mana, draw 2 Murlocs from your deck. Murloc Shaman just isn't really a thing anymore, so unless you're really digging for Burlock or something, chances are you're probably not going to play this card. I'm actually going to give it just 1 star. Drakari Defender, 3 mana, 2/8, Taunt, Overload 3. I could see it if it was Overload 2, but since it's Overload 3, this is just kind of insane. Like, you're basically giving up your entire turn 4 to play a 2/8 with Taunt. Not really that great. I'm going to give it 2 stars because of the Overload actually is a benefit in some cases, but we'll get to that in a minute. Icebreaker. This card is actually really strong. 3 mana, 1/3, destroy any frozen minion damaged by this. And that's pretty good actually. Shatter's not a good card, but this is actually good because you can kind of time it when you need to. I'm actually going to give this 3 stars because Freeze Shaman is going to be a thing. So very, very strong here. Solid card. Alright, Avalanche. 4 mana, freeze a minion, and deal 3 damage to the adjacent ones. So you freeze the one in the middle, and then you hit the 2 on the side for 3. It's kind of a different mechanic. It's basically an inverted Cone of Cold in a couple ways. Actually really strong because of the freeze synergy that Shaman has. I'm giving this one 3 stars because it'll likely be included, but it's nothing like crazy. But it is playable. All right, Thrall Deathseer, the cheapest Death Knight hero. Battlecry, transform your minions into random ones that cost 2 more, so evolve twice. And then your hero power becomes evolve. Transform a friendly minion into a random one that costs 1 more. Pretty cool. So not only are you freezing minions, but you're now also just evolving all your minions a ton, which is kind of fun. Might actually see quite a bit of play. I'm giving this one 4 stars simply because double evolve is very strong. For 5 mana, that's actually pretty great. and then your hero power no longer becomes summon a bunch of kind of potentially useless totems, but your minions are now just stronger. Alright, Voodoo Hexer. 5 mana, 2/7, taunt, freeze any character damaged by this minion. So it's basically ice or water elemental with taunt and does 2 instead of 3 and has 7 health. However, it's really great actually. I'm giving this one 3 stars. But this is why. So this is the freeze synergy that Shaman has. Mohadib, 6 mana, 4/4. Whenever another minion is frozen, add a copy of it to your hand. That includes your own minions or your opponent's minions. That's incredibly strong. So this is going to be a kind of a fun synergistic deck to play here. I'm giving this 4 stars simply because it actually has quite a bit of potential and is very strong. Only problem with it is it's a 4/4. However, you can freeze this card and, you know, actually no, because it says another minion, so it doesn't include this minion. However, if you manage to somehow get a copy of it in your hand, and you can have 2, they can trigger off of each other, and they do stack. So, say you have 2 Mohadibs on the board, and you freeze another minion, you get 2 copies in your hand. So really kind of a fun concept here. Alright, and then Snow Fury Giant, the new giant of the set, costs 1 less for each mana crystal you've overloaded this game. So one of the reasons I mentioned that the 3 mana 2/8 actually has a little bit of synergy is because, you know, you're overloading those mana crystals. Likely we'll see this played with things like Volcano, Lightning Storm, things like that. Actually a pretty reasonable card. This likely will end up costing maybe, you know, 4, 5, or 6 mana by the time you end up playing it, unless you really go crazy with those overloads. But I'm gonna give this one 3 stars because it's actually not bad. It's right around where you would expect a giant to cost and not be insane. Kind of comparable to Sea Giant, I would say. And then Cryostasis. Somehow this ended up down here at the bottom. Give a minion +3/+3 and freeze it. So kind of a cool effect here. If you want to copy one of your own minions and then just wait a turn, you get another copy back. You could play this on a legendary or something. That's insane. Give it +3/+3, make it harder to die, but then you're just going to play another one with, you know, since you have Mohadib out. So I'm actually giving this 3 stars as well because it's kind of has some good potential there. Alright, over to Warlock. Sanguine Reveler. 1 mana, 1/1. Destroy a friendly minion and gain +2/+2. So, you obviously won't play this by itself. But if you say you play this on turn 2, you're basically playing a 2 mana, 3/3, kill one of your minions. Is that good? Yes, actually it is, because eggs are a thing. And so, you destroy an egg, you get, say, like a 5/5, right? And a 3/3. And you didn't really have to do anything. That's really good. Plus, there's a lot of death rattles in this set. So I'm actually giving this one 3 stars because this gives you a good way to trigger those death rattles, and you get rewarded for it. Defile. This I am going to label as the strongest card in the set, actually. And I'll tell you why. Because this deals 1 damage to everything. Then it deals 2 damage to everything. And then it deals 3, and then it deals 4, and then it deals 5. So, not exactly how I said that, but if it kills something that has 1 health, and then there's also something that has 2 health, and also something that has 3 health, and 4, and 5, you can manipulate this so it will clear the board. And will proc so many different things if you're trying, you know, to play around those. And there's actually a lot of kind of depth that goes into playing this card, because you have to be careful to not just accidentally kill your own minions, especially when there's death rattles and things triggering, and when they die they summon new minions. So you have to really think about when you play this card. But for 2 mana you can basically almost clear the entire board. That's nuts for Warlock. This is a very strong card. Drain Soul. 2 mana lifesteal, deal 2 damage to a minion. So basically, they drop the cost by 1 mana, and you can't target face. Is that good? Not quite good enough to see play. 2 mana, heal 2, deal 2 is just not quite good enough in Constructed anyways. And I'm going to give it 1 star. Gnome Feratu. Battle Cry. Remove the top card of your opponent's deck. Do you think this card is good? I don't. Unfortunately, this card will not see play. Simply because battle cries are kind of going away, or at least less, impactful, and death rattles are more of a thing. And removing 1 card off your opponent's deck is not really going to be the biggest thing. Yeah, you could potentially mill something, but you might as well just play some better cards. So I'm actually just going to give this one 1 star. Howl Fiend, 3 mana, 3/6, discard your hand. Is essentially what this means. Whenever this minion takes damage, discard a random card. That's not very good because your opponent can abuse this a lot, especially when they have things like Mage Hero Power, or Rogue Hero Power, or Druid Hero Power, or just a bunch of tokens. This card is terrible. Will not see play. Treachery, 3 mana, choose a friendly minion and give it to your opponent. This is actually really cool because of a lot of cards that are in this set that have downsides to kind of having them on your side of the board. Also, you can combo this with Doomsayer and guarantee that it clears the board because you just play Doomsayer and then you give it to your opponent. Kind of like Mirror Entity does, except you guarantee that everything just dies. Granted, you give the initiative to your opponent now, but it's kind of a guaranteed way of clearing the board there. This card gets 3 stars because it actually has some really good potential and really good synergy. Unwilling Sacrifice. 3 mana, choose a friendly minion, destroy it, and a random enemy minion. So this card has some interesting potential. I'm going to give it 3 stars simply because there's, again, some good synergy killing one of your own minions as a warlock to kill one of your opponent's minions. Has some good payoffs there, so has some really good potential here. Now, Blood Queen Lanithil, Warlock's new legendary. 5 mana, 1/6 lifesteal, but has 1 attack for each card you've discarded this game. This card is very, very powerful, and I'm giving it 5 stars simply because the attack does not go away just because this card dies. So if you somehow manage to get this card back, or you don't draw until later, it already has all of that attack from each card you've discarded. This might just be enough to push Disco Lock over the edge to make it worth playing. Despicable Dreadlord, 5 mana, 4/5 at the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions. This is actually kind of strong. Unfortunately, it's only a 4/5 for 5. So it's basically 4/5, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions, which isn't bad. This will definitely be really strong in Arena. In Constructed, it probably won't end up seeing a whole lot of play unless we do see the rise of a Demon Warlock deck, which actually might be possible if you wait for one of the upcoming cards here. I'm going to give this one 3 stars simply because it does have a positive effect. Instead of just dealing it to all minions, it does it to enemy minions, which is actually great, especially if you're trying to maintain a little bit of control there in the middle of the game. Alright, so now we have the Warlock Death Knight. Bloodreaver Gul'dan. Battle Cry. Summon all friendly demons that died this game. So speaking of demons, let's bring them all back, right? And then the hero power really is the strongest part of this. Deal 3 damage, heal 3 damage for 2 mana. That's insane. That's 2 shadow forms plus your healing each time for 3. This is one of the highest value hero powers just outright from the new set. Simply because of how much net gain you're getting from this. This is very powerful, and I'm giving this Death Knight 5 stars as well, simply because, yeah, you might summon 1, 2, 3, several demons that died this game. That's really, really strong. But on top of that, you you have a very, very powerful hero power here now. So these two together, very strong. Alright, and then we have Warrior here. So Animated Berserker, 1 mana. After you play a minion, deal 1 damage to it. Seems kind of weird at first, right? But turns out Warrior likes dealing 1 damage to a lot of its minions. And this set is no exception. I'm actually going to give this card 3 stars because it's not incredibly powerful, but it does have some good synergy, especially with some of the other cards in the set. Alright, bring it on. 2 mana, gain 10 armor, reduce the cost of your minions in your opponent's hand by 2. So this is kind of the, good against bad players because they're like, oh, I'm going to dump my hand. And you gain 10 armor, oh well, but then you just brawl. So good players will not just dump their hand, they'll wait because it reduces the cost of their hand by 2 and that persists. They don't have to just do it right away. And so they'll take advantage of that. This card very likely will not see play. I'm giving it 2 stars because 10 armor is significant, and if you can somehow take advantage of this, say your opponent only has a couple cards in their hand, you might not be giving up too much for that 10 armor, but chances are this card will backfire on you more than not. Dead Man's Hand. 2 mana, shuffle a copy of your hand into your deck. Alright, well, Warrior now has a way to combat fatigue. Up until now, they kind of were just reliant on Elise adding, the pack into there, and that's about all they had. But now they have a way to kind of prolong the game, stall it out, and control Warrior. We may see a rise with this card. I'm going to give it 3 stars because usually if you're going to play this card, you'll have high value cards in your hand, and shuffling those back into your deck, or a copy of them into your deck rather, it is very, very strong. And so you could potentially combo this with like, what's his name? Hemet, and just clear out your deck and have nothing but good cards in your deck. Or you could, like I said, just kind of play the fatigue game. Forge of Souls. 2 mana, draw 2 weapons from your deck. Now, this card is pretty strong. It could make Pirate Warrior very consistent, even more consistent than it already is. We may see the rise of just a little bit heavier version of Warrior with a lot of weapons, a lot of just face damage, And so I'm actually going to give this card 3 stars because it has the specific draw of the weapons that you're looking for. Unlike the draw 2 Murlocs for the Shaman card that I rated poorly, you don't really want to draw Murlocs as Shaman anyways because you're not really trying to play Murlocs. But for Warrior, weapons have a lot of synergy with what you're doing. And so this is very, very good, very powerful, but not too insane or anything. Mountain Fire Armor. 3 mana, 4/3. Not bad. If it's your opponent's turn, gain 6 armor. This is actually not bad. It's not the greatest. I mean, it's just a 4/3. Otherwise, you're gaining 6 armor if your opponent decides to kill it. Unfortunately, it's not really good enough for constructed. But maybe if you are trying to go for more of the mid-range type of warrior, which isn't usually the most common archetype for warrior, this might see a little bit of play. I mean, the stats are pretty alright. The effect is alright. It's just not quite what warrior is interested in playing most of the time. Valkyr Soul Claimer. 3 mana, 1/4. Whenever this minion survives damage, summon a 2/2 ghoul. So, as I mentioned before, the animated armor, or whatever that card is, sorry, Berserker. We're going to be referring to that card quite a bit. Procs this card, gives a 2/2 ghoul. We'll see later, there's lots of ways to just kind of deal 1 damage to your minions. So this card, while not the craziest, I think we may see a little bit of play in it. I'm going to give it 2 stars though, just because it's not like anything insane. It's basically a 3 mana 1/4 Death Rattle summon, or not Death Rattle, because it has to survive. So, it's It's likely to just die potentially, but if it does survive, you know, you have a little bit of redeeming grace there. Alright, so Blood Razor, Battle Cry and Death Rattle deal 1 damage to all minions. So when we have a, you know, mini Death Spite is essentially what this is. You get a Whirlwind when you play it, you lose 2 attack, and then you also get the Whirlwind when it dies, or when it breaks. So this card, not bad actually. Not quite as good as Death Spite, just because you had that extra reach of, you know, 5 damage on the target when you killed it, but I'm gonna give it 3 stars simply because it's not a bad effect. We'll probably see some play. All right, Death Revenant, 5 mana, 3/3, gain 1 or +1/+1 for each damaged minion. Now this card may actually see play because it's not just your minions and it's not just your opponent's minions; it's all of them. So I'm actually gonna give this one 3 stars simply because there are so many ways to deal 1 damage to all the minions on the board in this set. Rotface. Whenever this minion survives damage, summon a random legendary minion. So 8 mana, 4/6, pretty low stats, right? But summon a random legendary minion. So you get this out, say on turn 8 or 9, and you have that animated Berserker. You're at least going to get 1 random legendary minion, and it summons it, so it's there. But then when we get to the new hero power, it's also pretty easy to combo this. So I'm going to give this card 3 stars because, yeah, you'll probably only get 1 legendary off of this. But the chances of it being good are higher than not. But there's a chance you could, you know, potentially trigger this at least twice, which would already more than pay for itself. So Scourge Lord Garrosh is the Warrior Death Knight. Battle Cry, equip a 4/3 Shadowmourne that also damages adjacent minions. That's pretty insane. So you're dealing 12 damage, plus you're also dealing, you know, you're dealing that to each swing. So 12 damage each swing, potentially. Pretty strong. But then you also get the new hero power, Blade Storm, which is basically Whirlwind for 2 mana every turn. Really, really powerful, especially if you're building your deck around damaging minions and them surviving and you clearing their board because you have Whirlwind every turn. So really powerful. Giving this card 4 stars because it is strong. Unfortunately, it does kind of require you to be playing that type of deck that damages your own minions, which weakens them a little bit. And so it's kind of the risk versus reward. But it is very strong. Okay, now we're into the neutrals. So I'm going to be flying through quite a few of these a little bit quicker than some of the other set cards. Cards like this will just kind of get 1 star. Won't see play. It's just kind of in the set. So, all right, Arcus Felon. Okay, so now that I say that, we get to this card that actually will likely see play. Arcus Veteran. 1 mana, 2/1. Give a friendly minion +1 attack. Very similar to the Abusive Sergeant, which saw a lot of play. The only trade-off is this is only 1 attack, but it's permanent. So this will likely see some play in the zoo kind of aggro decks. Alright, Deathscale Knight, Murloc, 1/1 lifesteal. Turns out, even though it has lifesteal, not really good enough to put in a Murloc deck. Wretched Tiller, 1 mana, 1/1. Whenever this minion attacks, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. You might as well just be playing Leper Gnome. Fallen Sun Cleric, 2 mana, 2/1. Give a friendly minion +1/+1. Shattered Sun Cleric doesn't see play in Constructed, really. This won't either. Okay, so now we're going to be seeing 3 princes. There's a 2 mana prince, a 3 mana prince, and a 4 mana prince. All of which are terrible. So I'm going to be giving them all 1 stars because I feel their effects are awful and you should never run these cards in your deck. I'm not really going to explain too much why, but it basically boils down to why would you kill the curve of your deck to get a very mediocre effect? Tainted Zealot is kind of interesting. 2 mana, 1/1, Divine Shield spell damage. So it's kind of like Blood Mage Salnos, but not quite. You don't draw a card, but it survives at least 2 actions because of the Divine Shield. This could end up seeing some play in Paladin for the Divine Shield synergy. I'm only going to give it 2 stars though because you'd probably rather just play Thalnos if you want the spell damage. Tuskar Fisherman, give a friendly minion spell damage +1. Kind of interesting, might see some play somewhere if you're really kind of going for that spell damage synergy for cheap, to make it immune, but this won't really likely see any play in Constructed. Death Speaker. Battlecry, give a friendly minion immune this turn. So we actually can see some kind of crazy combos that could potentially happen here. So you have this card, and then you have this card. If you give a friendly minion immune this turn, and a friendly minion spell damage this turn, and you start playing Defile, you can do some crazy stuff there. Not saying it's going to be viable, but you could have some fun with that. I'm going to give this one 2 stars because there is some potential for this card to be usable, but nothing stands out in particular. Drukhari Enchanter, your end of turn effects trigger twice. Now this is kind of fun because think of things like Ysera or Ragnaros the Light Lord or things like that, right? That trigger at the end of your turn. Well, now they just happen twice. So this actually has some potential powerful kind of swings to go along with it. The problem is a lot of those cards cost like 8. So it's not feasible really to play this at the same time, but I'm going to give it 2 stars because it does have the potential. It's just kind of far-reaching for some of those more impactful cards. Happy Ghoul, 3 mana, 3/3, costs 0 if your hero is healed this turn. Hey, so turns out hero powering and emoting as a priest can potentially pay off now. I'm going to give it 2 stars because this might actually see some play if that ends up actually being a thing, but it's not like it's crazy or anything. Alright, Hildnir Frostrider, freeze your other minions. So it's a 3 mana 4/4, which is well statted, right? Is it worth the extra 1 attack though? And I actually say yes because Murabi wants you to freeze your minions. And so if you just decide, hey, I want a copy of all of my minions now, well, there you go. Now you do. The problem is now you don't really have any way of defending yourself unless you have some taunts. But this card actually has some potential. I'm going to give it 3 stars because, for Shaman, this will actually probably see play. Mindbreaker. Hero powers are disabled. 3 mana, 2/5. So that's kind of interesting. Denying your opponent their hero power. The only time this would actually be good is if your opponent had played one of their Death Knights and they're really needing to play that hero power. The problem is the ones that are usually come with a 5 attack weapon or some means to kill this, but it kind of has a fun effect. We'll give it 2 stars because it might see some tech play somewhere. Alright, so here's one of the other princes. Moving on. Shallow Gravedigger, 3 mana, 3/1, Death Rattle, add a random Death Rattle minion to your hand. So the problem with this is there's a lot of bad Death Rattles out there, and it's random, it's not a discover. And so you could just get completely shafted by this card and be stuck with 2 dead cards now instead of none. So I'm actually giving this one 1 star because you shouldn't put this in your deck. It's just not good. Vryghoul, 3 mana, 3/1. If it's your opponent's turn, summon a 2/2 ghoul. So this would be great if it was a 2-drop. But it's a 3-drop, and it's not worth playing. So, sorry. 1 star. Here's a fun card, though. Arphis. Death Rattle, add a random Death Knight card to your hand. Now, Death Knight cards are not the hero Death Knights. Keep that in mind. They are a special card type, kind of like the Dream cards are for Ysera. And I'll be showing those at the end, because there's another card that gives you Death Knight cards. This card is actually has some pretty good potential if you look at the cost of those Death Knight cards. Um, I'm giving Arthas 3 cards, or 3 stars rather, because the Death Knight card itself is actually uh, worth about 2 more mana than it costs for each of them. And so a 2 mana, get one of those cards that are pretty good for 4, and it has Death Rattle, so you can potentially abuse that and get maybe more than one out of this. It's pretty good. This card is very strong. Corpse Taker, 4 mana, 3/3, Battle Cry, gain Taunt if your deck has Taunt, and then you do the same thing for Divine Shield, Lifesteal, Wind Fury. So basically, as long as your deck has something with one of these keywords on it still, this card gains those. And I mean, a 4 mana 3/3 with Taunt, Divine Shield, Lifesteal, and Wind Fury is pretty good. So this card actually gets 4 stars because it's very powerful, has a lot of good synergy with several different decks, and we'll likely see quite a bit of play in those types of decks. Death Axe Punisher, 4 mana, give a random lifesteal minion in your hand +2/+2. So this works well if you're running a lifesteal heavy deck. The problem is there's not all that many cards that have lifesteal spread across all the different classes, or for any one class in particular. So this card likely will not see a whole lot of play except for maybe 1 or 2 types of decks, but I'm going to give it 2 stars just because it's very unlikely. Grave Shambler. Whenever your weapon is destroyed, gain +1/+1. That's kind of interesting. The problem is when your weapon is destroyed, you kind of have to plan ahead for that. And the only class that's really able to take advantage of that would be Rogue. And why would you play a 4/4 elemental that turns into a 5/5 elemental because you used your weapon? It just seems too fiddly to me, so I'm going to give it 1 star. Grim Necromancer. Battlecry, summon 2 1/1 skeletons. It's actually kind of interesting, but not really good enough. I mean, no one plays the 4 mana 2/4 summon a 2/1, and it's basically the same thing, so 1 star. Now, for Keening Banshee, 4 mana 5/5. Whenever you play a card, remove the top 3 cards of your deck. So basically, we're playing a Yeti with 1 more attack with a terrible effect. This card is awful. 1 star. Meat Wagon. 4 mana 1/4 Death Rattle. Summon a minion from your deck with less attack than this minion. So you have to buff this somehow. And there's only a few classes that could take advantage of that. However, it only has 4 attacks. So by the time that you actually take advantage of that, this might just already die. And you might not even have any 0 attack minions in your deck. And so it's random. It's not like you can choose which minion gets pulled out. And so the only decks that this would likely work with are, say, Paladin. And that's really about it, honestly, is Paladin. And it's just too inconsistent, so won't see play. Night Howler, 4 mana 3/4. Whenever this minion takes damage, gain 2 attack. Kind of interesting, but not really good enough. I mean, Gurbashi Berserker, the 5 mana 2/7, that basically has the same thing, but it's 3 attack. Doesn't see play. I don't see why this one would see play either. 1 star. This card, on the other hand, Phantom Freebooter. Gain stats equal to your weapons. So it's a 3/3 pirate for 4. However, you're likely going to play this when you have at least, a 1/2 or a 3/2 weapon equipped, which means it'll be at least a 4/5 or a 6/5, which is pretty insane for a 4 mana pirate. So this card actually is really, really strong. We'll likely see play in pirate, rogue, or warrior. It gets 3 stars. And the other prince, terrible. Actually, kind of the least terrible out of the 3, but still really bad. All right, Rattling Rascal, 4 mana 2/2 Battlecry, summon a 5/5. That seems pretty good. But then when it dies, it summons a 5/5 for your opponent. which is not so good. However, there's this thing called Treachery, which is not the worst card in the world. And if you're running that with Warlock, you might be able to give this to your opponent. When it dies, you get another 5/5. Problem with that is it's a 7 mana combo to summon 2 5/5s and a 2/2, and kind of is a little fiddly. But, you know, it gets 2 stars because there's potential there, but not very viable. Serenite Chain Gang, 4 mana 2/3 taunt, summon, battlecry, summon a copy of this minion. Actually really great with hand buff synergy. So even if you just get it +1/+1, you know, it's a 3/4 taunt and another 3/4 taunt for 4 mana. That's really, really good. So this card actually will likely see play if we see a hand buff paladin. So I'm going to give it 3 stars because that's actually pretty well statted and has some good potential there. Ticking Abomination. This is kind of the meme card of the set. 4 mana 5/6, and when it dies, it deals 5 damage to your minions. Again, one of those cards you want to give to your opponent with Treachery, otherwise you should not be playing this card ever. So, I'm going to give it 1 star. Wicked Skeleton, 4 mana 1/1, battlecry, gain +1/+1 for each minion that died this turn. So I mean, the only time this would really be okay is if you brawled or something, did some crazy board clear with Volcano. And each of those things usually cost 5 mana. This is a 9 mana, maybe anywhere from like a 5/5 to a 9/9, which just isn't good enough. So, 1 star. Bloodworm. Kind of another one of those vanilla lifesteals, but instead of the priest 3/3 for 3, it's a 4/4 for 5. But it's a beast. That means it's good, right? No, it's not good enough. It's 1 star. Cobalt Scalebane. 5 mana 5/5. At the end of your turn, give another random friendly minion +3 attack. And it's a dragon, right? So 5 mana 5/5 dragon? Nope, it's not good enough. It's not going to see play, unfortunately. Only in Arena, though. It's a good card in Arena. Corpse Raiser. 5 mana 3/3. Give a friendly minion Death Rattle. Resummon this minion. So, again, kind of like Ancestral Spirit, except it's on a minion. Problem is it costs 5, and so it's harder to kind of one-turn combo this with another minion that's worth bringing back. But has some potential, but likely won't see play. So 2 stars. Skelemancer, 5 mana 2/2, but if it's your opponent's turn, summon an 8/8 skeleton. So, again, kind of with the weird, if it's your opponent's turn and this dies, you get rewarded. But why would your opponent kill a 2/2 to give you an 8/8? They wouldn't. So, likely this card will just not see play because it's a 5 mana 2/2 that your opponent's probably just going to keep up. So, only reason you'd play this is if they played Doomsayer or something, but eh. Alright, Sunborn Valkyr. 5 mana 5/4, give adjacent minions +2 health. This card's actually not that bad. It's not great, but it's okay. I'm going to give it 2 stars because it's decently statted, keeps some of your minions healthier, and it's kind of, it's not terrible. It's just not great. Tomb Lurker, 5 mana 5/3. Battlecry, add a random Death Rattle minion that died this game to your hand. Well, that's interesting. Will this actually see play? Probably not, because, again, I mean, well, maybe, actually. I mean, you could play this in a N'Zoth type of deck, where if you want to bring back one of your Death Rattle minions, say like an Aya Blackpaw or something, you could bring her back and then get some more synergy out of that. But maybe in a Death Rattle Rogue N'Zoth Jade, but that's the only real reason to play this card, maybe. Otherwise, it's like, just play N'Zoth and bring him back anyways. So, because the only reason you want to play a Death Rattle minion is if they have a Battle Cry or a stacking effect. So, alright, Venomancer, 2 mana 2/5 with Poisonous. Just not a very good card. Very vanilla, just not going to see play. Bone Drake, 6 mana 6/5 dragon. Death Rattle, add a random dragon to your hand. So this could kind of work out well for you. Or you could just play Nether Spite Historian and discover a dragon that you actually want. So, 1 star. Furnace Fire Colossus. 6 mana, 6/6, Battlecry, discard all weapons from your hand and gain their stats. So you just, again, discard a Fire War Axe, you now have a 6 mana 9/8. Arcanite Reaper, you have a 6 mana 11/8. Is it worth it? Unfortunately, no, because having a weapon is incredible tempo and incredible value, because weapons have charge. Minions do not. So even if you were to play this insane card and discard a ton of weapons from your hand, and you get like some, I don't know, 30, 15 for 6, that's right around when your opponent has cards that just kill a minion. Doesn't care. Doesn't care how much health it has. Things like Vile Spine, or heaven forbid this just gets, told to follow the rules or something. This just would not go well. So unfortunately, I'm giving this card 1 star. Necrotic Geist, 6 mana, 5/3. Whenever one of your other minions dies, summon a 2/2 ghoul. Now here's one of the crazy combos I was talking about. So you give this card immune. You give this card +1 spell damage. And then you play Defile. And you start killing everything. Except for this card. But it keeps summoning ghouls. Infinitely. And I guess we'll find out what happens when you do that. When the set comes out. But other than that, this card is not going to see play. Nerubian Unraveler, 6 mana, 5/5. Spells cost 2 more. So now, this is like the Inverted Sorcerer's Apprentice, but it's neutral, and it's also your own spells. But it has 5 health, so it's a little harder to kill. This might actually see a little bit of play in some tech choices. I'm going to give it 2 stars because it has that little niche potential, but it's not like it's going to be in every deck or anything. It doesn't have that, crazy, just blanket effect like N'Zoth did. Skulking Geist. 6 mana, 4/6. Destroy all 1-cost spells in both hands and decks. So, Jade Druid, say goodbye to all your Jade Idols. That's mostly what this card is for. I mean, yeah, there's other 1-mana spells, but this is mostly just to shut down Jade Druid. And I would say a lot of decks will end up teching in at least one of these just to deal with the Jade Druid kind of insanity that's going on right now. So I'm going to give this card 3 stars because it does handle that pretty well, but it's not going to be in every deck. Especially not 2 of them. Spellweaver, 4 mana or 6 mana, 4/4, +2 spell damage. So it's kind of kobold with 2 more health, 2 more attack, and 2 more mana. Probably not going to see play because usually you only play those cards to synergize with a combo, and this just costs too much. So 1 star. Bone Mare, 7 mana, 5/5. Give a friendly minion +4/+4 in taunt. That's pretty crazy. This card probably won't see a whole lot of play in Constructed. It might in the Taunt Druid. I'm actually giving this card 3 stars because it does have the potential. The problem is you do have to have a minion on the board, which isn't necessarily the hardest thing, especially for things like Token Druid and stuff. But it is very powerful. However, it's not like absurd, but it is a strong effect, and this is going to be like almost equivalent to like Bog Creeper in Arena. Okay, and so now we have our final culminating neutral legendary here, the Lich King. Taunt, 8 mana, 8/8. At the end of your turn, add a random Death Knight card to your hand. So this card at face value, 8 mana, 8/8. With taunt is, just kind of vanilla. But these Death Knight cards, we'll look at here in just a sec. So you get one of 8 cards here. You have Frostmourne, Army of the Dead, Doom Pact, Death Grip, Death Coil, Obliterate, Anti-Magic Shell, and Death and Decay. And if you kind of analyze each of these cards, as I mentioned before, they're about 2 mana under what they would probably actually cost. Frostmourne, really fun effect. Summon every minion killed by this weapon. Uh, really strong. Army of the Dead basically takes the top 5 cards. If they're minions, it plays them. If they're not, then it just discards them. Doom Pact is kind of a reverse Doom, where it clears the board, but you lose that many cards off your deck instead of drawing them. Death Grip just is kind of steals a card out of your opponent's deck, puts it in your hand. It's kind of the weakest one. Death Coil deals 5 damage to an enemy or heals 5 to a friendly. Obliterate is kind of a assassinate with kind of a penalty, and then Anti-Magic Shell buffs all your minions, and then they can't be targeted by spells, which is cool. And then Death and Decay is a cheaper Hellfire, or a cheaper Consecration with 1 more damage. So each of these cards is actually pretty impactful in the game, depending on which one it is you end up getting. And so I'm giving the Lich King 4 stars, partially because he is kind of expensive. It's likely you're only going to get 1, maybe 2 Death Knight cards from him. But these Death Knight cards are very powerful. They are very impactful to the game, especially if you get something like Frostmourne, or even Army of the Dead, and you pull off 2, 3, up to 5 minions, just flood the board. It's pretty insane, especially if you're playing these Death Rattle decks. So Death Knight card's going to be very powerful. Be really interesting to see kind of how they play out. There are only 2 sources in which you can get them from. You have Arthas, the 4 mana 2/2 when it dies, and then the Lich King at the end of your turn you get a random Death Knight card as well. So that actually wraps up all of the cards in this set. So I hope you've enjoyed the review. Sorry it's kind of a little bit longer than I had initially anticipated, but it's fun to go through all these cards, and hopefully you're excited as much as I am for the set. So until then, take care.